I'm afraid I think somebody's hacked into my bio there and added a few bits and pieces, but I'll take them. I'll take them. Good morning, everybody. What I'm trying to do is it's a bit of a change of pace. I am going to talk a little bit about some global trends and try and put some context. Indeed, try to give some of the big picture, and I hope that it's going to be inspiring. Although I've got some new data which might be quite depressing, but we'll get to that all in due course. So let me just. There we go. Hang on a second. What I would do is I actually spoke at one of the Green Monday events a number of months ago, so I can give a little bit of an update on some of the investment activity and also a recap for those of you who weren't at that event. Talk about some regional trends, global regional trends, because there's some very dynamic things going on within the clean energy space. Then some global energy trends to put it all in the biggest picture context that you can imagine, and it's a bit of a reality check. That's the bit that might actually be a little sobering, and then we'll talk about energy efficiency. And just for the sake of information here, if I here we go. So trends in clean energy investment. If I talk clean energy here, I'm talking renewable energy, but also smart grid, energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage. If you look at the energy system is going from something to something cleaner, more decentralized, etc. It's all of the pieces of investment around that. It doesn't include here nuclear, not because we have anything particularly against it, but simply it's not in these figures. And what you can see is this enormous surge over the past 7 years, around 50 billion, rising around 243 billion last year. So it's always worth just keeping some context of the overall flows of money here, because at the end of the day, all of this is about money. If you look at it on a quarterly basis, this now includes the last quarter, which you'll not have seen at the previous event. You can see it's actually a difficult time. So you can see very graphically in this industry the ramp up. That's all about the attention that was paid to all things green and clean and mean, Kyoto Protocol ratification, inconvenient truth, and so on. That big ramp up, and then you can see the crisis. It goes. It actually crashes. The peak is, of course, late 2008, Lehman Brothers. A very difficult quarter, Q1 2009, and then it comes back with a bit of help from stimulus funds and so on. But then the last quarter, very difficult, driven really by a lot of it is to do with reductions in tariffs in Europe and also the financial crisis. This is a very, very capital hungry sector. And when the debt markets freeze up or go into some sort of tailspin, as they are now around the Greek crisis, you can really see it almost immediately in the fundings. This, of course, is funding. This is not when things get built. This actually leads the building by 18 months, possibly 2 years. Again, putting it in perspective, this is just generating capacity. This is the supply side, maybe of less interest today. But again, just to get some idea of what's going on around the energy efficiency space, this is renewable energy generation capacity investment. And so, this kind of feeling amongst a lot of the mainstream business community and in the public that, well, all of this stuff is kind of marginal and it's silly and it doesn't really, it's absorbing nearly as much capital in building wind farms and solar and geothermal and so on as fossil fuel generating capacity. In terms of what's been keeping the sector ticking over during some very, very difficult financial times, the stimulus packages that were announced in 2008, you'll all remember green stimulus, and there was a sort of competition between countries to launch stimulus programs and then pretend that they were greener than the other countries and so on. Now, this is just mapped against that definition of clean energy. So renewables, energy efficiency, smart grid, carbon capture and storage. And you can see the total amount was about $200 billion. Again, bear in mind, $250 billion per year of investment overall, and then the stimulus programs coming along with a slug of about $190, $200 billion as a sort of one-off to be spent over a number of years. We're about halfway through that, and you can see last year, about 75 billion of the 240 actually came from those programs. And so therefore, without those stimulus programs, this sector would have been completely gutted in terms of investment activity. Not completely, but somewhere around a third of it would actually have, just under a third, would have just been up in smoke. Interestingly, you can see over the next few years, there's another good year this year for stimulus package money, flowing out to the front line, and then it starts to get dismantled fairly rapidly. And of course, the hope is that as the costs of the technologies and other support mechanisms, other pieces of legislation cut in, that fills the gap. So we're not just pulling the rug out from under the clean energy space altogether. A couple of things that happened to support the sector other than stimulus funding. You can see there European rooftop solar, a growth from 20 billion to nearly 50 billion last year, driven in large part, not exclusively, by Germany. Just an extraordinary amount of build, something just under 8 gigawatts of build. Put it in perspective, that's about 10% of their peak summer demand they've added in 1 year from solar. So on a sunny day, you can shut down 10% of the grid and just run it off the rooftops. And of course, that becomes very, very challenging for the grid operators. That you start running out a few more years like that, and then the question is, well, what do you do on those days with your baseload power, with the nuclear that you've still got in Germany until 2023 and so on, because it's very hard to shut that stuff down. And so it becomes a real challenge to manage. But they're adding a huge amount of it. And then China is another of the big stories, clearly, in this space. Growth there from 40 billion to 50 billion. China, leading country. This is just asset finance for new builds. So this is, by asset finance, we mean wind farms, we mean big projects, but also no, here you're not getting the distributor. Those German rooftops are not actually in this. Let me see if I've got a point. Yeah, I've got a point. So you can see Germany, I can't really see my dot. Okay, is down there in 4th place. If you added the rooftop solar, then I think Germany moves into, it moves further up, to possibly to, I think it's in 3rd place, just behind the US. But really, China has come in the last, I would say, 4 years from a relatively low position to be the leading country for investment in clean energy. So let's have a look a little bit in terms of that regional trend. We'll sort of dig down and see what does that actually look like for people working in this space. So here you've got this little triangle shows, you've got over on the right side, Americas, north and south. Over here you've got Europe, Middle East, Africa, and up there you've got Asia and Oceania. So it's just very simplified, 3 regions of the world, but you'll see why I've done it, because that is the wind industry, wind generating capacity in 1984. You can see it over there. It is an American industry. Most of you will have watched Rain Man, the film, and at one point they're driving past this huge wind farm in the desert. That is, of course, in the US, not in Europe. So we think of it as being a European industry. That actually, as we run the clock, doesn't happen until the 1990s. That's 2000, European industry, and then you see Asia starting to wake up. And by 2010, the wind industry, in terms of net additions, capacity additions of the manufacturers here, has moved up and is already nearer to the central mass of Asia than it is to Europe or North America. What does that mean for some of the companies? 2005 there, you can see there's just 2 Asian companies in the top 10 in wind. That's Suzlon of India and number 8, Goldwind of China. By 2010, you've got Sinovel, Goldwind, Suzlon, and Dongfang. So you've got 4 in the top 10. And to stay in the top 10 in wind, you have to be adding manufacturing capacity. This is heavy engineering. This is the stuff that other parts of Siemens do. And you have to add capacity 25% per year between 2005 and 2010 to stay in the top 10. Very, very challenging. Let's have a quick look at solar. We don't have the same length of time series there. That's something we probably should work on. But that's 2006. And if we run the clock there, this is manufacturing capacity. You can see there that it runs up to essentially becoming an Asian industry. Almost no manufacturing capacity in solar being added anywhere else other than Asia. In terms of companies, 2006, interestingly, it always was an Asian industry, or at least from 2006. It's just that it was Japan, Taiwan, Japan amongst the top 10, and only 2 Chinese companies. By 2010, you've got 6 Chinese companies and 2 Taiwanese companies. So, and then there's only First Solar and Q cells down there. Now, the amazing thing is, over this period, the companies that dropped out or dropped down, it's not that they didn't invest, it's that they simply didn't invest fast enough. To stay in the top 10 in solar, you had to be adding capacity at 46% per year. And these are big pieces of kit. This is hard. This is hard for engineers to add that much capacity that quickly. And so, what you've got overall is it may be, when you look at the numbers, that solar is this % of world energy supply. Think of those growth rates. And if they're sustained for a few more years, and think of the experience of Germany, when they're adding 10% of their peak demand in 1 year, and then roll that out to the sort of things that we might see by 2020, then obviously we're in for quite a rude awakening. Those who think that things are going to be the same, they're certainly not. And because of this rapid growth, we're now at the point where the levelized cost, no subsidies, the levelized cost of solar is actually cheaper than daytime utility prices in the wonderful electricity markets of Hawaii, Italy, and Turkey. And I would like to, obviously pay visits and really understand what's going on by going on tour to those places. But what you'll find by 2015 is that the number of countries where rooftop solar beats daytime electricity prices will have increased and become a very long list. And by 2020, essentially anywhere sunny, if you want to run an air conditioning unit, you should put PV on your roof rather than buy from your utility, unless the utilities do something about lowering their daytime prices quite considerably. So the world in the future is not going to look like the world in the past. And that has also implications, obviously, for energy efficiency, as we'll see. We'll talk about some of the system implications of all of that. So this is the point where we do a bit of a reality check. And this is new stuff, so I do apologize. I'm actually be interested to hear feedback on whether, how easy it is to follow this stuff. What we've got here, I've plotted the world's energy compass. When we talk about big picture overview of what's happening in the world, you can't get bigger than this, because down at the bottom you've got coal and oil, and at the top you've got renewable energy. So down is bad, up is good, up is holy, up even your children will love you. Over on the left you've got nuclear, and over on the right you've got natural gas. So you can sort of see where the world goes. That's where it was in 1970, where the X is the center of mass, if you like, of the world's energy footprint. Okay, it's sort of towards oil, and obviously, if you think about where you end up at these 5 nodes of the world's energy compass, the world would look very, very different. Okay, oil, that's geopolitical hell. Coal, that's carbon hell. Nuclear, that's Fukushima hell. Natural gas, that's Gaslands hell. And then up there, renewable energy, as I say, that's sort of nirvana. Now, I'm being enormously tongue-in-cheek. Please don't quote me on any of that, because we will have a mix, and obviously a mix is good. In fact, being all the way up at the top would actually not be ideal either. So we'll have some sort of mix. But this is great because you can sort of debate about where you want to end up. So let's have a look where we've been going. 1970. 1975, not much difference. 1980. 1985, you've had another oil shock, so now you've come a little bit back from oil. 1990. 1995. 2000, we're going towards natural gas and oil. And then 2005, China has had its sort of extraordinary 5 years, 2000 to 2005, really changes the landscape, and that's 2007. So I'm sorry you heard it here first. Actually, what we've been doing is moving more towards oil. That little red line, that's the footprint. Net, in terms of, we've been growing energy footprint. We've also been oiling it. That's been the major change. I'll just run that again. Hang on a second. So that if we go back in time, there we can see the shape hasn't really changed that much since 1970. Nuclear's coming on, and net, more oil. So why is that happening? Here we can do this at a country level as well. There's the US. You can see there. You've got, and this is all in tons of oil equivalent. We'll look at some other things in a minute. You've got the US there being largely sort of oil, natural gas, coal, and then that is China. right? So if you want to know why we've moved towards coal, it is actually China. It's actually not. I mean, China has also moved us towards oil, but the big why we've not retreated from coal has certainly been China. That there is Europe. The other things, the other countries are largely irrelevant. That's Japan, that's India, that's Brazil, and so on. No, hang on a second. Sorry, that's Brazil. So just let you look at that. So it really, I mean, there's only three blocks that really matter here, and that is Europe, US, and China. And very different. You know, all the other countries look pretty similar until you get down to sort of Brazil and, of course, China with its enormous coal dependence. So now here, what you've got is those three. I started with that triangle. Oops. What happened there? Sorry about that. So I started with that triangle that just divided into three, because you've got too many countries, it's too hard to figure out what's going on. So this is now Americas, Asia, and Oceania, and Europe, Middle East, Africa. And just know that Asia, essentially you've seen Japan. Asia is not Japan. Asia is largely about China, very small amount of Japan and India and a few other things, but it's basically basically China. Okay, so now this is energy consumption in millions of tons of oil equivalent. This is what it looks like if you do it on the basis of GDP. If you say energy consumption per unit of GDP, it's so when you look at this, it's absolutely clear the world doesn't have a general energy problem. It has a China problem, right? In fact, it has an India problem as well in terms of energy intensity within GDP. If you could get Asia to have the same energy intensities as the rest of the world, as the developed world, you would actually dramatically reduce energy usage. And that's the path that both China and India have embarked on. Those are the commitments that they've made at Cancun and so on. It's all about energy intensity within their economies. It's all about addressing this, making that red line look more like those. But before you say, oh, well, okay, I get it. We've really got an Asia problem, and it's all about intensity and GDP. Not quite sure why we're here today. This is a fun one. This is energy consumption per capita. So before you blame Asia too much, the blue line is the Americas, principally North America, because we've already seen Brazil doesn't make much difference. So before you blame Asia too much, it's different cuts of the data, and you can identify different things going on. So that's where we are. And I say it's a bit of a reality check because for all of that investment in clean energy, we haven't managed to move the center of the mass up the page at all, and the problems look pretty daunting. And that actually is a good segue into the topic today around energy efficiency, because you can see that for all of the growth of renewables, we have got to do the energy intensity in the economy and energy efficiency within that. So in other words, we've got to shift to industries that are less energy intensive. That's to do with social development and so on. But then also, we've got to do the energy efficiency piece. If we don't, it's hard to see how we can actually shift out of all those other energy sources. So I'll say a few words on energy efficiency, but I actually want to leave it to the experts in the room, and the course of the day you'll learn a lot more. The first point is, this is CO2 reductions, but you can essentially understand this as energy reductions. And this is a data set of American companies that were designated as climate leaders. And the point I want to make is if you look at 4 years in to essentially their CEO and their board saying this matters, 4 years in, on average, they've saved something like 13% of their energy footprint. Right? But that's at the time that they have also grown during that period, which you can't see on this chart, by I think around 6%. So 4 years in, 20% improvement. And you can see that it is sector after sector after sector. So the good news is this stuff actually can be done. This is US commercial building, energy consumption per unit floor space. Not only can it be done, what we can see is historically it has been done consistently. You can see more than 500 kilowatt hours per square meter per year back in 1980, and it's somewhere just sort of north of 300, 330, 340 currently, and then obviously with plans to increase that. And this is a period when there wasn't that much focus until the very end of that period. There wasn't that much focus on this issue. And yet you've seen very substantial improvements. That's essentially a 40% improvement, 1% a year, without trying anything. So if you think about it, your baseline that you're trying to beat in your businesses is not can we improve on today, but can we improve on 1% per year? Because you can see that companies that did can essentially do 20% in 4 years. They can get to 5% per year. And companies that don't look at it will do about 1% per year. Okay, so again, this is just big picture metrics to bear in mind. Some of the things that are going on should accelerate it. We've got here, you've got dynamic pricing, so smart grid pilots. You can see a range of, this is now residential, not commercial property, but you can see that with smart grids, you'll get anything from 5 to 45% load reductions. So, very substantial changes that are possible based on some of the technologies that are now making their way out into the marketplace. So you could even argue that 5%, I don't know if you can beat the 5% per year, but there are certainly lots of different technologies that should enable you to achieve that. And the story's really only just beginning. Here you've got 1993 over on the left. You can see 2010 in the middle, and then growing out there. This is energy efficiency expenditure by US utilities. And the picture will be a bit different in Europe, but probably not hugely. We have only really started in the last 3-4 years systematically going after energy efficiency at the policy level, at the utility level, at the business level, in the same way, of course, as we did after the last 2 energy shocks, but then didn't maintain it. And I think what we're getting back to now is that sort of thinking, but you could argue that there's probably more lock-in. There are more reasons now to maintain focus on energy efficiency in the coming decade, even if oil prices and gas prices, as we know in the US, have come down considerably. A couple of other thoughts. This is energy cost per unit of office floor space. You've got cooling, heating, lighting, 70% of the problem. Other and computing, 24%. One of the very interesting things is that despite all of the appliances that we now have in the home, in the office, in fact, that mix has almost not changed in the past 20 years. So we've got the appliances that you sort of think, well, all of that driving that energy demand in the world must be that we're just using more and more appliances. Actually, that's not the case. But this is, so it's 75% is to do with the building itself, not what's in it. But then just bear in mind that efficiency, energy costs as a proportion of the costs that are embodied in the building each year are about 1%. It's a bit of a strange one, this, because we've included here salaries. But if you think of, and I'll show you why in a second, if you think of all the stuff going on in this office building, Linklaters, the energy spend is 1% of what Linklaters cares about in terms of what's going in and out of the door and so on. So, we've got to keep that in perspective. And I think that that's a sort of cup half full, cup half empty point, because you can either say, well, 1% should senior management care, should anybody really focus on that? And I would argue that they should, because efficient office space, efficient commercial space is also more productive. And if you can just improve the productivity of the 88% salary related, you get more of a payoff there than you might actually in the energy efficiency alone. So thinking about buildings as systems and places for people to work actually gives them a potentially much bigger impact than just the energy impact. In terms of rental yields, for those of you who are in the commercial real estate business, there's some premiums for better office buildings. So there are ways of recouping the investments. This is a US sample, state by state. I think that the outliers, New York and Boston, what we've got here is the more expensive the office space, the more expensive, the higher the salaries in the respective location, the more the premium there is in percentage terms for good office space. And I'm going to leave it there because I think I'm straying into areas that we probably want to deal with properly rather than just fly by. But you can see that there's a bundle of issues around efficiency to do with how necessary it is, but also the technology, the potential for impact, and also how it's then part of a system that will shift forwards and actually will bring all sorts of co-benefits. So its importance, I think, lies potentially more substantial than just the kilowatt hours involved. And so thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand back to our gracious host.